not April Fools. The April 1st, 2025 special board meeting of the Everett Public Schools is now called to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
President Mitchell.
Present.
Vice President Herman.
Present.
Director Radwanski.
Present.
Director Atkins.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Stelzman, have there been any changes to the agenda since it was first published?
Madam Chair, there have been no changes to the agenda this time.
Thank you. By general consent, we will approve the agenda as published. And now, Dr. Stelzman, would you like to introduce the topic?
Yes, our first study session tonight will be budget development, led by Ms. Andy Tress.
Thank you, Dr. Saltzman, President Mitchell, Board of Directors. Tonight is an opportunity for the board and the community to have an overview of the district's budget development process. We will have an opportunity to review the budget development process which includes its development life cycle and timeline, key dates on the budget development timeline, updates to the legislative session as it impacts decisions and resources and allocations, a review of the updated four-year fiscal outlook, and a review of the budget development work scope so far. This slide illustrates the district's overall budget development process and the cyclical nature of developing the district's budget. It examines examining our overall fiscal impact and budgeting processes. What I really like about this graphic is it shows that we're always in budget development season. As you can see here, the cycle highlights key processes during the budget cycle. What I want you to note is that the budget is adopted during the summer timeframe, which sets the expenditure capacity for the fiscal year. As we move into fall, we really look at operational adjustments that reflect actual enrollment, ultimately aligning our staffing with our enrollment compared to our budget. The district, along with aligning its actual staffing, will look at its projected revenues and expenditures. In the winter timeframe, the district will also evaluate the state and federal program, as we are often know most of our final awards and from our state and federal programs. Then we begin evaluating our budget parameters for the next year to aid in the budget development process with our fiscal advisory council. Within that winter and spring timeframe, we're also evaluating if the district has additional resources to add or enhance the budget, or possibly looking at reductions in future years, or if we need just to maintain our resources as we move forward. And then we come to spring, where we incorporate the defined additions or possible reductions into the formal document, which is called the F-195. It's a state-defined document that is then presented to the board as well as presented to our public. This slide really illustrates the key dates or timeline of that budget process as we looked at it from the cyclical nature. But I really want to highlight kind of the starting point when we look towards the next fiscal year, and that's really looking at enrollment. We do hire an outside consultant, Les Kendricks, to help develop our enrollment. Just a couple things I do want to note around that. Not only does our consultant help us develop it, but we also do an internal analysis in our budget team. Karen Buckman, our director of budget, she's here tonight, and she helps with that process. We also have our administrators review that enrollment because we need to get their feedback to ensure that we're looking and moving in the right direction, because it really drives our building staffing. Within that, we're starting our allocation process, which we have actually delivered to our schools at this point in time, and they're in the process of developing their staffing and their master schedules, which is happening in the March timeframe. Tonight, we have a board meeting where we're engaging in our budget development process as a workshop, and then ultimately in April, we'll be integrating any of the legislative outcomes for the 2025 legislative session. I also want to highlight that our students have been working on their associated student body budget development processes at our secondaries, and then the high schools will be presenting to the board on May 13th. Ultimately, we will upload that information to the ESD and then come to the board in July for the first reading of the operating budget. Within that, we're also monitoring the legislative session. This is a long session, so it is the first year of a 2-year biennium or state budgeting process. So this is the longer part of the session. And then we're identifying strategic actions and program updates to develop and build and balance our budget for the year. So as I mentioned, we monitor the legislative process throughout this process, and it's a big, a big part of our work, along with the board also provides their priorities in the legislative process. Just want to highlight for our community and the board the calendar this fiscal year. It started in January 13th. It is anticipated to end on April 27th, and that's when we'll know all the final outcomes and any additional enhancement to the legislation at that point in time. Some other key dates here are last day for each house to adopt their own bills, and then ultimately they go to the opposite house where they will review those bills to adopt as well. Just some fun facts, as well as just how much activity the state has throughout this process. At the beginning of the session, there was over 1,600 bills introduced. And then in addition to that, the governor releases its budget in the December timeframe. Just want to highlight that budget was developed by former Governor Inslee, and so we have seen a set of priorities from Governor Ferguson, but he did not develop the initial governor release budget. I also want to highlight, and we'll touch on this a little bit as there's continuing developments, but the House and the Senate released its budget proposals on March 24th, and we're going through the process around that. Some context of where we're at with this year and within the state budget is that there has been a lot of talk around the state budget shortfall. And I like this slide. It just highlights the varying projections of the state shortfall. So Governor Inslee projected a $16 billion shortfall over 4 years. Governor Ferguson projected a $15 billion budget deficit over 4 years. And then you're seeing here, it ranges from approximately $7 billion to $16 million over the next 4 years. And so as some context around some of the anticipated, that there probably won't be a significant amount of anticipated funding across the state, but within that, we're seeing that the Senate and the House are proposing some revenue proposals to help support some of that offset. So we'll see how this going forward. There's still a lot of unknowns where we're at, but it is good to know where we're at within the session and what the possible impacts for the district will be as we move forward. So, as I mentioned before, the board has set its legislative priorities. I want to highlight those 3 priorities, one of which was increasing special education allocations, as well as ample, stable, and equitable funding. We had a focus on material supplies and operating costs, as well as substitute cost funding and prototypical model funding as well. In addition, we also had a priority to fund healthy and contemporary school buildings. And that sets the stage for the advocacy for the district. I also want to note that not only do districts advocate, but we also have K-12 organizations and associations that advocate. There was a constant message this year from those organizations and associations about K-3. And that included special education, which aligned with the district's priorities, as well as an increase in material supplies and operating costs. I'm going to refer to it as MSOPs going forward. That's the framing terminology we typically talk to it, which also aligns to some of our priorities as well, and then transportation funding increases as a whole. There was a few bills introduced this session around special education. There are still 2 that are active. And for varying reasons, each of them provide different benefits. So the Senate bill actually provides more funding than the House bill does. In 2 ways. One, the multiplier is higher in the Senate bill versus the House bill. And in addition, the Senate bill also decreases the minimum threshold for safety net rewards, meaning we are allowed to claim more for students of average higher costs being served in our special education programs for those services. Again, that would give us a significant amount of funding going forward, but the House bill does also provide some additional fundings as well. I also want to note that they're looking at changing how they distribute the safety net awards, which is a benefit, one, for the ability for us to know that most of these students are most likely going to be awarded within our safety net claims, but also a cash flow perspective for districts going throughout. Ultimately, currently the way the safety net program works is that we apply for the grant in the March timeframe. We get the final award in July, and then we get funded for that in August. What this would do is say that students that have IEPs, who had prior IEPs where they were safety net eligible, we would be able to claim them throughout the year, and they would provide that funding on a quarterly basis. And it helps districts from a cash flow perspective because we are providing those services with our staff as well as our service providers throughout the whole year. And so that's one thing that's a benefit on both sides of these folks. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about material supplies and operating cost funding. We are seeing one still active bill that was initiated at the beginning of the session, but I do want to highlight the House has increased factors in their budget proposal. But again, the Senate, what I will tell you is there a theme that the Senate has higher funding factors for K-12 districts than the House, but the House's budget also provides an additional MSAC allocation more than the bill that was introduced in the beginning of the session. So it's still a relatively good amount of increase. The Senate bill is about $2.4 million to the district, where the House bill would be about $700,000 for the district annually. For the Senate bill, it increases the multipliers as well as it changes the calculation a little bit, so there might be a little bit of an impact because they're using a historical average for the enrollment portion of it. But what I do want to know is that the Senate is really trying to put some guardrails on how districts use that fund, and they're requiring that we use those funds only on MSOC. And why that matters is typically our funding is an allocation. So the district has choice on where we can choose to spend our dollars, but this is saying if we're going to provide you with the allocation, we want you to spend it on where we're providing net additions. And partly because they're hearing a lot of advocacy around how districts are unfunded across the state. And just from a note, when we put together, the board put together its legislative priorities, just in utilities and insurance alone last year, we were on $1.1 million underfunded in our MSOCs and about 2.3 in total MSOCs. So that's just one relevant aspect around what that means for the district. A few other things I do want to highlight around other activity. We are seeing some legislation around transition to kindergarten. Typically what happens around this time is that often sometimes when they set their budget in the prior session, it's not enough to fully generate all the enrollment. So we're seeing that with both sides with the transition to kindergarten, and so that really addresses just this year's shortfall. It means they're committed to fully funding all of the enrollment this year, but also they're looking at possible reductions, which means not maybe necessarily growing our transition to kindergarten program, so capping the enrollment at this current year's enrollment. And so that's just one we're monitoring and actively looking at as well. Another one is increasing the compliance pathways for clean buildings performance standards. And this would give us an actual waiver to meet those compliance rules, and it will most likely allow us to not have to implement staffing needs for another 5 years. Another good item that would help districts across the state is around providing funding in the transportation funding model for our depreciation schedules for our yellow buses, but also allowing that for non-yellow buses, meaning if a district has a van that they're transporting a student to and from school, we would be funding in our transportation vehicle fund to purchase those vehicles going forward, and so that they can support that transportation. So it's not just focused on the yellow buses that the district owns. Another highlight on the positive side for district is that we're looking across not only the Senate bill, but also across both the governor's and the House budget of reducing the employer portion of pension costs. So it would be a staff cost reduction because the state sets those rates, our pension rates as a whole. To take a pause here just for a second, because we're going to talk a little bit about some of the dead bills or the non-active bills, as I like to call them, because sometimes they don't always stay inactive, and they come back because they're necessary to implement the state budget. And one of those is actually the levy capacity. So we had two bills introduced, one from the Senate and one from the House around levy capacity. They both, probably prior to March 24th, the 3 days were there, they were considered not active, but now with the budgets being out, the House has brought in their state budget back their bill around levy capacity. What that would mean for us is that we would actually have the ability next year to collect all of our levy capacity that the voters approved. So annually for the past 3 to 4 years, we've been what's called rolling back. We're not able to collect the voter approved levy amount because of the cap calculation. And that gives us from a calendar year perspective about $4 million and from a fiscal year perspective about $2 million. And it could mean that we could increase our levy in future years and ask for more educational levy for our operation, our general fund in future years. Looking based on the model, it could be $8 million annually. Again, there's still a lot unknown around that, but that is something that is back and in consideration for schools across the state. I know one, we were monitoring, not necessarily in our priorities, but monitoring significantly towards reducing the bond passing rate for construction bonds and to a simple majority. Unfortunately, that is dead at this moment in time, and we're not seeing any activity coming back in the state. And then I want to highlight the last one, which was one of the big threes, around the pupil transportation, and that is currently not an active bill, and we don't anticipate it to come back right now. And so now we're seeing state associations focus on the two remaining ones and support for the ones with the higher multipliers as we move forward. So at this point in time, I want to give the board an opportunity to have any clarifying questions around the current legislative activity that still may impact K-12.
Are there any questions? I have one.
Yeah.
For special ed, so if we can get that quarterly, if they increase the multiplier, if they give us more for safety net, since I think we always spend $4 to $8 million more, then that gives us potentially $4 to $8 million back into our general fund to serve other things in case they don't increase other things we want.
Correct. It would give us more levy capacity. So the Senate bill multiplier factors right now where they currently stand, again, and my guess is they'll probably come down as they start to reconcile where it currently stands. Ultimately, they take two factors, combine it to one, and they increase it to 1.32. It would give us about $7.2 million more, which is a good thing. And then the safety net threshold would give us about $1.5 million to 1.9 million. So there's so many factors and so much time left, it's really hard to say where that's going to land. So we have to just be mindful about that as we move forward. But there's just a lot that could impact us, and we're just sort of in that pending, what does that mean for us in future years?
So, but more importantly, if they improve their payment for the special ed, for our kids with special needs, then that frees up more of our money for all kids.
Correct. Correct. Thank you for that clarification. All right, so as we move on, so that was some context setting around where we're at with the state, what possibly additional resources the district could have as we move forward. I want to talk a little bit about the fiscal outlook. And this is a fiscal outlook that doesn't really incorporate any optimistic legislative outcomes. What we did when we built the revenue projections is we used, again, the median enrollment that was presented to the board in that March timeframe from our Chief Operating Officer, Larry Fleckenstein. And then we looked at both the budget, the House, the Senate, and the government, and the governor's budget, and kind of went with the lower of the factors, or the one that was more costly to the district. So it does make some changes to our overall projections. If you look in the 25-26 fiscal year, it does change it a little bit. That's really driven by the fact that although we're getting a savings in our pension costs across all three of those budgets, the medical costs that we were originally projected when we looked in December timeframe is actually pretty significantly more driving factor for that change, as well as looking at some of the assumptions around what are cost increases that we know we need to do to maintain our operations. I like to say as we keep the hot light on. This also still resumes a reduction in 26, 27 and around the same amount though, so that's a good thing. We're not anticipating anything significantly different from a reduction time frame, as well as an amount, a total dollar amount of about 1% to 1.5% of expenditures. And why that's important is because we're in a kind of a place of two roads ultimately. One would be we're going to end our fund balance this year above 8% of total expenditure. So above our board policy of 5%, we're in a great place there. But our expenditures are still exceeding our revenues. And we would be in a place where we probably want to hold on any major changes, but not maybe make reductions throughout attrition. And ultimately, because we have this legislative session and next legislative session to kind of get a sense of what could be additional revenue factors, so we don't want to make any big significant changes. But if we do have additional funding factors, whether it be in levy capacity or some enhancements to our MSOC funding, what does that look like? What do we need to invest in the next year? And part of our budget development process is engagement across our community, one through our fiscal advisory council, and we'll talk about that in a minute, as well as our board. So looking at two different kind of factors around that. Is it one-time investments and enhancements, or is it reoccurring enhancements? And reoccurring enhancements, we have to look at the longer-term picture around there. So I really like this roadmap to how we assess our resource allocations as we move forward, and really want to align it with our strategic. When you think about aligning resources, it needs to come from the strategic plan. What are those priorities, and what does that mean for the district and to help serve students? And then we also want to look at stakeholder engagement, ensuring that we're getting our board's feedback, ensuring we're getting our community feedback. And we do that. We will be doing a session with our fiscal advisory council after spring break, similar to this, around what are some of their priorities we need to prioritize as we have maybe possible enhancement going forwards. And then ultimately we'll make budget recommendations to the superintendent to build into the operating budget, which then the board will approve in April, and in August, in August. So that is where we are having an opportunity with the board to discuss some possible one-time or reoccurring enhancements with the board. So each of you and each senior staff member, we have a senior staff member who are going to work with each of you and walk through any questions you may have, and looking at two different ways. We want to focus on one-time investments, because if they're moderate investments, we may only be able to do things that are not reoccurring. And then we also want to focus on reoccurring investments. Because if we have maybe a little more than moderate, we may need to do things that help support our students, and that we want some prioritization opportunities around what we would want to enhance the overall district budget for. And ultimately, the goal would be to have you prioritize them, ranking the first item as one. It could be two ways. So you think about if we have no additional funding, but just a little bit more, this is the one I want to do. I want us to consider as we develop our budget. Or if we have a significant amount of resources, this is the one I would like you to put the most investment to. So the most total dollar amount from that perspective. So I'll give an opportunity for senior staff to come work with you. They each have a copy of the document as well. They know who they're supposed to be working with directly, and then we'll give about five minutes to do this activity, this engagement part, and then we'll have a share out back with me as well.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so one time, like, these are one time. He's not saying, but just getting money into. Yeah, this would be. Yeah.
Right.
So what? Technical adoption. We already are. Yeah. Are there, for example, we're planning on the key five. To go to. Do we do it in 1 year?
This is, okay, and then maintenance project versus maintenance.
Yeah, these are like labor and things that we do.
Thinking about those. Like, I mean, what I think, like, this is probably the things we need to. It doesn't, it's like, it's surprising because they're caterers or
But that could be almost a minor fee issue.
For sure.
So I sort of see these as going.
Yeah, I mean, and this would be, buying stuff to replace older equipment that may be, yeah, well, they're all less, you know, my refrigerator needs, I need a refrigerator. It's still working, it's. But it uses that energy, I got a new refrigerator, and I've been using this much energy, I don't know, it's still like on top of work.
So I can see what this part
Yeah. And music is good, like the things that you, but this is something broader than that, like light risers, or things that, you know.
And then some of these pieces, like I know that we, you know, set out to some.
I wanted, yeah, and I think part of this
Years ago, so we have historian need, this is,
sort of.
summer programs to really
That's
shift
what
it,
I'm
really
really
focus
curious
on
on is,
like that.
but right.
Of the summer school, and we're thinking about additional supports.
Is one that you want to also touching maintenance, like existing operating we already have. So I'm gonna put this as a combined program, maybe a 2 to 30, sort of seeing those together as a package.
So school-based.
Hopefully to get away with things that are also additional
Additional for like producing, 3,
that's like, those are, yeah, no, that's, yeah, so parts of that to combine these other two. But it's, so I'm gonna. So office and depending on the need.
Yeah. Well, and the further you get from the schoolhouse, pieces, yeah, there are things that we can stay out with our central special services staffing, that you know, early each of them.
Yeah. Okay. That's not exactly right there.
So you can offset.
And those things are not like,
The academic side, we did it so much, there's mostly and it's teaching below.
Okay, so.
and so these would be the things,
To the one time,
these would be continued, or like
these people are really fascinating.
No, we're gonna talk about
Facilitators.
what your priorities are and what.
It's a good work, you still have people who are doing those pieces, but it is harder when people don't say, they say, okay, well, how does this directly impact this directly versus kids, even students that sort of summer programs too. Not that I'm trying to say, so I'm just saying something else. You know, it's one of those pieces where it's hard for families to see, unless they've had experiences where they're like, oh, you know, things like that. I know I've seen them. It's hard to do, it's a challenge. Or 34 years old.
enhancements.
And then the research, I think it's the first option, because we're like, hey, you can like summer school for these parents, summer.
Oh, we're not I think we're super smart, like, there's a lot of.
Are, you know, they're coming in, there's big lunches, so that's a little bit.
We really try to think of activities that we feel.
Social workers.
Maybe. So principals are coming up with some really innovative pieces.
Yeah. So those
Those kids, that is
yeah, and that's really nice job. That's why I'm sort of keeping us to
does a really good job with their summers. They do a site-based summer program where they are like the security sites. Kids come from the security, security, it's just a lunch. But they can come and they can check out the books, they can they can do some activities, so they kind of open generally during that service. Jennifer.
What are the principles? Is it like Everett, we've got it at this corner?
There's that pseudo.
You know what I mean?
They can always use more
They can always,
They can always use more security and stuff.
yeah.
And this one,
It's a,
and then
it's, I know there's
watch.
they, heritage books. It's quite
Listen to their stuff. But this allows us to
for at least more than just
that other ones we
because I think that's but yeah, I think that's definitely some of those pieces that factor in.
Okay, this goes to this, there's no more right answer.
It would, vote to reductions, but one of the things I would say is that special education is not gonna.
Yeah, this is, the thing is, it's rock on wood, I feel like right
We
now.
have kids who are historically different schools, this, we have services,
Unless
that team is trying to make it over, but
there's a goal there. So I'd love to actually put this on. Supporting our students' access to skill. Academics, these two are sort of central.
exactly, and this is one of those pieces, we've been doing some music and asking for the last several years of purchasing that's for schools to try to get that program running, but it's centralized for like the jobs and then we like these really awesome programs.
Yes.
Instruments is in pretty good shape. But one of the things we have is advisors like that. How do we get, and so we're looking at how do we utilize like some things like that for advisors? How do we set up a civic auditorium for like risers and chairs? First
What did you say in the doctor's
I know.
like this.
And again, this one is teachers.
Yeah.
This summer, some of our schools, they've got capital funding, some small groups.
Right.
But others really don't. That creative. For schools, we have
That's a really interesting concept. I don't
We'll
know
know that this
I know that,
how that
we were just talking about,
you know,
Jackson,
what's the
they were
data.
modifying learning their create storage spaces. Speaking about.
What are steps? That's very
To do that. That's like a whole. That would actually be really.
That's just the whole.
Yeah, that's what I've got. Because even so, I mean, this could be, you're talking about, you're not doing this. I know we're gonna talk about strategic transfer on us, but
In high school.
the concept, and if we can do it, we can get them to see next year, they don't have to be.
Every aspect of that.
But again, we see that sort of support of that.
That's what I was say.
Yeah.
So doesn't it work? Yeah.
It's not really 50% more schools that these work with.
So it's the same idea.
Right.
Yeah, this is the student achievement, that's how I see it.
Events and the teachers talk about these are kids I get to music clubs, they talk to their passions.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It makes me wonder about future schools that have.
I mean, I think we need to make,
One of the things that kids enhancing their music just seems for just like you know the music that's where they're being able to really a lot of
So that's probably
community necessary. If we could do these kind of things and all of us do that support there's different ways of covering less traditional. It would involve technology, especially
So think about this. That's what the person I what I think.
It's just to know that
right.
that's the level of.
yeah.
I think there's a lot of community there for us to
Keep that low.
create.
3 more minutes?
Especially things like
Christian groups, no more questions. I know we have some.
We need 3 minutes. Awesome. Thank you.
We're good.
You're happy
All right, so I want this opportunity for the directors to kind of each of you to go around and give us just some feedback around your discussions and you know, what you were thinking about when you were prioritizing each of these enhancements to the district's budget.
How much time do you want it?
We can spend about 5 to 10 minutes on that.
Okay, so we each get a minute or two? Okay. Jenny, you want to start?
Sure. I could go over the actual rankings, but maybe I can give you some thoughts on how I did some of those rankings. For the first one of additional resources, sort of those one-time enhancements. Well, the ones that rose to the top for me, curriculum, closest to the students, and academic achievement. I grouped together the maintenance projects, maintenance equipment. I think as a district, we need to maintain our facility. So that what needs to happen there, we do need to prioritize, but absolutely recognizing athletic equipment, music equipment. Again, I grouped those together because those programs are what keeps our kids in school, engaged. And I say that having one child who is athletic, another child who is music oriented, and we did either whether to pay the athletic fee or, you know, buy the music equipment, so there are some ways we can make that happen for the student. Office equipment was the one that I thought, unless there's a dire need for, maybe would be at the lower end. And then rationale for the ongoing recurring enhancements. I actually put on my top school-based certificated staffing and summer programs. I really wanted to see more information as a district that we had the data behind showing that that was going to help us catch kids up so that they could start the next year ready to go. So the data behind the summer programs, and then the others were sort of in the middle there. And I think I've spent way more than my time. But great exercise, a lot of food for thought.
Thank you. Charles?
Yeah, so on the recurring enhancements, I put school-based certificated staffing at 1, 2 central special services staffing, central academic staffing at 3, summer programs 4, custodial staffing 5, and school-based security staffing 6. I think to the things that I hear in the community, and the things that we can do to show our community direct impacts. And I think to additional certificated staffing to be able to show the community that we're reducing class sizes is one of the most direct things that we could do to just do something about an issue that I hear in the community about. And no amount of, talking about the legal requirements of class sizes will convince people that class sizes are just fine or right sized as it is. I always hear they want smaller and smaller. On the one-time enhancements, I put maintenance projects as 1, maintenance equipment as 2, curriculum 3, music equipment 4, office equipment 5, and athletic equipment 6. I think with office equipment and athletic equipment, I just don't see it being a huge need. It doesn't strike me as something if we were to suddenly have a big pot of money that we would want to go out and spend that big pot of money on athletic equipment or office equipment. But I do definitely see there being a really solid argument for why we need to put that into maintenance projects, and especially maintenance equipment that could possibly help us save money in the future.
Thank you. Robert?
I am lockstep with Parker. I think that the most important place to invest and deploy resources is towards student achievement. And everything else is, I just agree.
Oh, that saved us time. I'm on the fence, Charles, I appreciate your maintenance, because on the one-time things, I struggled with them because, we maybe have a bond coming up, but that people really do like nice schools. We get complaints when there's moss and stuff, but I sort of did because I think it was the presentation we had this summer for the one time on music, and having a daughter who was in the arts, that I made music my number 1, and then curriculum number 2, because it directly, and then athletic equipment, so sort of opposite Charles in that point. And then the office equipment, maintenance, and projects, I sort of all made a 4. I struggle with meeting the adult needs, and it's hard. The chairs are falling apart, but I struggle putting money towards adult needs, so I struggle there. So that's just that. On the recurring things, I think we're all in agreement almost on the school-based certificated staff. Not just the smaller class sizes, but if a program can exist because there's not enough kids, but it is enough kids that it's worthwhile to have the program. I mean, that's a shame, because then 12 kids lose out because there's only 12 kids. Or if there's 37 kids, 18 kids don't get a smaller classroom. And then I struggled there with, then I did that summer programs, because I think we have seen some value, but more data is always necessary. Not the kids who do it to get ahead, but the kids that are needed to get to standard. And then I sort of grouped the custodian and security the same, because clean schools, safe schools. But I think we're okay with security, and I think we're okay with custodians. So that was sort of my thing. So we're all a little different, but that's okay, I think.
I appreciate that, and that will help us prioritize things as we see, hopefully, additional funding coming into the district through the legislative session. And thank you again for your feedback. So I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps and where we're headed. We're meeting with our fiscal advisory council, which has community members, student members, staff members, as well as union leadership, union representatives as well, to do a similar engagement around helping the district prioritize enhancements to its budget as we move forward, and then also just communicate where we're at if we don't have additional funding, and that we will be going through a process of reductions for the 26-27 budget. I'm very hopeful the legislative session will end on time, and that is a really key date as we finish building our budget for the next year. And then, as I mentioned ahead of time, the students are actively working on their budget presentations with our budget director, and as well as our athletics and activity director. They will participate in working with the students in building the budgets and those presentations, and they'll be presented to the board on May 13th. And then we will hold another fiscal advisory council in May, really kind of letting them know where we landed with our legislative outcomes, where we're landing with our budget development, and ultimately culminating to presenting the board with the first reading of the budget on July. And then the district is actually required to post that on July 10th for the public. And then the budget hearing and adoption will be held August 19th. And culminating to the next year of the cycle. So I want to thank you all for your participation, and I really appreciate all the feedback as we move forward.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
Sometimes, like I know with our levies, we like them in February because if they pass, then we know we don't have to RIF. There have been years we're waiting on the state budget, that April date, because we want to make sure we don't have to RIF. Do you see any reasons, based on where we're sitting right now, what we may or may not get from the budget, do you see any reason we might have to do anything with staffing levels decrease?
Not this fiscal year. So as we go into the 25-20, not for the 25-26 fiscal year. And so it would be for the 26-27 fiscal year if we don't have any changes to our funding impact, where we will have to look at staffing.
Okay, so but if they're delayed, because I hear things.
Yeah.
So
for this year, it won't impact
okay.
what we do in regards to the timelines. So just context with certificated staff, if we are going to reduce certificated staff, we have to notify them. And that's why the legislative session date is really important, so that we can provide those notices. And so for this year, we would not be in that situation.
So they could go an extra month and we would just be okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, please.
First of all, thank you. I thought that was a fantastic presentation, great information. And I really appreciate our process in doing the budget in not counting on legislative. We're sort of making sure we'll be covered. And I think this year's a great example of just the unknowns. Uncertainty is sort of the word of our time, it feels like. Some of the questions that I've been getting from people out in the community on our budget, our budget has over $20 million in federal funds and special purpose. And those, I feel like we've gotten word that is secure, and so we can count on that. Do you want to just, though, because we're in a public meeting, talk about federal funds a little bit?
So we are monitoring that, and we are starting to get notice on what possibly may be impacted. What I saw recently is that it's unlikely that Title funding will be impacted, but Title I funding, but Title II could be at risk. And we don't know what that means from a perspective of, is it going to just lower our allocation for Title II, or are they, so it's a wait and see kind of situation from the federal perspective, because we won't really know awards until September. And so my recommendation would be that we hold until we know the final outcome. And then some of the state pieces of it, we are seeing some drawbacks on state pass-through grants, though, as we go through this budget process. So I'm curious There's not a lot of clarity yet on what that means, and so I'm curious what that could mean for the district too. And so we'll be balancing all of that as we go through the process. And so what we know, and so some of our prioritization may be, are we gonna maintain, because we're losing funding state-wise or federally wise, even though we're getting additional funding here, and that's gonna be the next round of conversations once we have a little clarity on the 27th.
Okay, because we could use some of those general funds to make up a shortfall if
Yes.
needed, and that's sort of why we have that balance.
And that's a good point too, where we have a relatively healthy fund balance to absorb a 1-year uncertainty around the federal and that state challenges we're facing too, so.
Perfect, thanks.
I wonder too, just because of I appreciate the conversations we've had with the superintendent, our one-on-ones, like that federal noise, kind of keeping it away because of what the OSPI is sort of doing for us, that if there is just a request of how can we be better communicators back to the community when people do ask, that we're watching it, we're monitoring it, how as board members can we have, the key talking points, so we don't let that federal noise.
So that, first of all, that's what I've been doing, working with Roman and Jen, and through communications, we'll have talking points. And also, all staff has been getting updates from me,
Yes.
by the federal government. Great question. But to answer everybody's question from the board's perspective, this is a tightrope. So the federal dollars, we may not know until September. So as you communicate, so luckily our district, and not luck, but the wisdom of our financial prudence has gotten us where we're gonna be okay, seeing that we have to be aware of any movement by the federal government. We are monitoring it daily, so I will give you some bullet points, but we don't get those updates every 2 weeks from Chris, from OSPI. The second piece is going back to, let's say, reduction in force, which is always a big word. We're in a good place right now in the district that we don't see that happening through attrition, but as we get into next year, we still have to tighten our belts. We'll be tightening our belts every year. So we're in twofold operation right now. Locally, in our budget that we get from the legislature, we can't count it, we know we're in a good spot. There'll be some movement, but nothing major, as you heard tonight from Andy, plus your recommendations help us. From the federal government, it is a tightrope, because come September, what's the impact? First impact for the board and for the public is the kids that deserve free or reduced lunch are gonna get free or reduced lunch. That is our major impact. Title II grants that Ms. Tress is going over with you might be impacted, and we have to look at that really closely. The positive for the system, I know it's very challenging for the board and the public, is the fund balance was a little bit higher. It's good that you want it higher right now. It gives us a little leeway up to that September walkthrough. And then as a board, as a community, and for legislation, we have to continue advocating the federal government of what their purpose is and how they fund certain needs in the state, and the state has to work with the feds, which I think you all do a really good job keeping, update on that. But I would certainly do that, to let you have some talking points, and staff gets the updates, I'll get you the updates. It's really the updates I get from Chris Rydell, which I want to publicly say OSPI has done an exceptional job informing the superintendents.
Or even just say, maybe we just say, let's go to the OSPI website, because they have lots of information.
But we do have to your question, Director Mitchell, and to every board member's question, just keep an update on the federal government, and also what Andy said, September, what a weird tightrope that is, because we're planning now and waiting for information for September. That's the challenge we're going to face.
And we'll be kept updated.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate it. Thank you for that clarity.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions or comments? Yes?
On that note, I really look forward to hearing about budget assumptions. Do you have a rough order of magnitude for what Title II funding has been historically?
No, order of magnitude, I don't know. off the top of my head. Our major ones is not, Title II isn't a significant federal I would say Title I, I don't want to say it's not significant. Title I, our food and nutrition revenues and IDEA are our largest federal programs, and that equates for more than 2/3. So that just some perspective. I don't know the total value off the top of my head. That's not one I look at as closely as I do the answers to that.
Thank you, and I would also say, Andy, that was a really great presentation. I can tell that you worked really hard on it, and that was great. Thank you.
Anyone else, or are we think it's a really quick meeting?
There's another presentation.
Oh, there's a whole other, oh my God, thank you. I was like, this is like, I was looking at the clock, I'm like, this is the weirdest night. Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones. Yeah, I know, it's looking outside. Yeah, it's beautiful. I have errands to do, so.
So good evening, President Mitchell, Board of Directors, Dr. Salzman. Our team are very pleased to be here this evening to share with you our strategic plan progress, sharing out measures and metrics that we utilize for our strategic plan. This evening, we'll be sharing some data and evidence, but more importantly, what we really hope that you will hear tonight is the story of our journey of systemic improvement through our strategic plan process. So as we reflect upon the last 4 years, you may remember we began our strategic planning process in the middle of a pandemic. We remember that pretty specifically because I remember specifically looking at our superintendent and saying, "You want to do what?" But actually that strategic planning process was right on the money. It was such a great opportunity for us because it became the North Star, became our compass. When we continue to push through, the focus of our work around the student priority outcomes really helped us to establish what was the important pieces, how do we reprioritize the work. And so we were really lucky to have a superintendent who really drove for that. Let's continue to do that strategic planning process, even when we were in shutdown, when we were in hybrid. There was lots happening, but it really helped us to drive the work forward. But as we kind of reflect on these last 4 years of our strategic plan, we really watched it evolve. Over the time, it's evolved to identify new opportunities for growth, and it allows us to build consistent, congruent structures that really support continuous improvement and align with the strategic plan objectives. So this adaptive approach really ensures that the district can continuously improve and align its efforts with the changing needs of our students and our system. So tonight we'll review our strategic plan journey, really connecting that work through the initiatives, identifying areas of both success and growth for our system. And finally, we'll briefly forecast our next steps as we plan for the extension of our strategic plan for an additional 5 years. So you're likely really familiar with both of these two graphics. The one to the far side here is the strategic themes. These are kind of those overarching themes that were collaboratively developed from our stakeholder feedback. And it provided really the larger buckets or categories for our strategic plan. You can see here, we've got supportive culture where each student is engaged and thrives and values learning, consistency and accountability for key processes affecting student success, balanced with differentiation and innovation, community engagement, human capital with recruitment, development, and retention, and finally, effective instructional practices. These are kind of those large themes that we have that help to drive our strategic plan. And of course, on the other side, you are super familiar with the students' priority outcomes, which we talk a lot about at the end of, you've seen it in just about every board presentation. These are really our anchors. These student priority outcomes have really been the drivers for the work that we are doing, and everything that we do really revolves around those components. What you might not necessarily always see, though, is kind of what's in between those strategic themes and the impact on those student priority outcomes. So you have those overarching themes, but from each theme we then have objectives or goals in each of those areas. Those really give us a little bit more specific information about unpacking those things. What does it look like? What's our goal in that area? And then from there, we actually draw out some initiative. These are really clear actions that we develop so that we can accomplish the key work that we need to accomplish the objectives. And you have heard lots about those in your initiative updates when we do our periodic progress monitoring of the strategic plan. So you'll hear an initiative owner come up, talk specifically about those milestones and timelines, the benchmark accomplishments that they've had, and what helps us to really reach those student priority outcomes. So how do we get from generic theme to accomplish those priority outcomes? We really scaffold out those objectives in each theme area, considering what needs to happen to bring each theme to life in our system. For example, the key objectives in the area of the theme area of supportive culture, where each student is engaged, talks specifically about expansion of opportunities for each student and staff member to experience positive relationships and support students' holistic needs. So when you heard that initiative update, you heard a lot about what are we doing to cultivate those relationships. This was one of the first objectives that we really worked on in our strategic plan, and really it was beautiful coming out of recovery, thinking about how do we teach kids not only to have relationships with the adults in the system, a positive working relationship with those caring adults, but also interfacing with each other, not on a screen, right? And that was a real challenge, still continues to be a challenge sometimes with students, but cultivating some of those key actions that helped us to reconnect the people within our system. So each of these initiative plans are these specific strategies and actions that our organization takes to really help us to achieve those priority outcomes. So unlike lots of organizations, there's many businesses and the private sector that talk about a strategic plan, and a lot of times you'll see that as like a long list of an annual operating plan of discrete tasks and a checklist of here's the things we need to do this year. But we don't really see it that way. And in fact, ours is really more of a process that helps us to identify and often celebrate the strengths and systemic assets, recognize the needs that still exist or persist, and develop actions that really help us to achieve our mission. So as my colleagues will share this evening about the measures of our strategic plan initiatives, we want you to listen for the foundational actions and evidence of success that will support the future endeavors moving forward into the extension. And this foundation is truly built on collaboration, it's built on innovation, and it's built on shared vision. It's not a siloed checklist. Our strategic plan is really a cohesive strategy that drives our success, and it's to help all of our students in Everett Public Schools to inspire, achieve, and thrive. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Meisner to the podium to share actions and outcomes of our strategic themes, and he will begin with supportive culture. Dr. Meisner. Thank you.
All right, excited to share a few details. As we get started, I was just reflecting, at this time of year, we start thinking about next year, we have some people inquire about our public schools, like to work here, and our strategic plan is part of their story about what interests them. And the superintendent's vision with the strategic plan is something to be proud of, and it's a powerful recruiting tool. So let's dig in. We're going to look at each of these strategic themes, and I have the opportunity to start with you with supportive culture. So looking back, we're talking going back a few years. What were the key initiatives that came out of the supportive culture theme? We developed a lot of shared, common, alignment. And it started with social emotional learning. It started with positive behavior interventions and supports. And it was all about unpacking what those acronyms and what those terms really mean, so that we had common language, common practices, and shared tools. We just moved towards clarity and consistency. It was a learning too. We had to really study it, and initiative teams went deeply in those areas. As we developed those common practices, shared routines and tools, we made sure we applied a culturally responsive lens to them so that what was being implemented fit those values that we hold dearly. And those two initiatives really were the core of the supportive theme culture for quite some time. If you were here a while ago, you might remember they started on their own. So we had separate initiative teams with social emotional learning and a separate team with positive behavior interventions and support. Why? Because there was a lot of deep work to do, but eventually those two merged together because they're so integrated. Later, when we added the academic part to this work under the umbrella of MTSS, multi-tier systems and support, it connected to instruction. So that's when it started to move towards implementation. But going back, we started in isolation to go really deep, and as we went towards implementation, we merged. So some highlights: Ruler, our ongoing investment in Ruler, helping students to learn their feelings, moving them towards self-regulation. Ongoing investments. We also implemented Second Step in the elementary schools, which is a prescribed curriculum of lessons and units for students to go deeper in that development. And the calendar guide artifact here shows that culture is a symbol or an example of the culturally responsive lens that we apply. So how does this theme connect to the priority student outcomes? And it shows up pretty clearly, or it does clearly, in the strengthening student wellness, engagement, and safety outcome. More evidence of our implementation. You had the recent update from Director Mimi Brown with MTSS, and as I shared, that's when these initiatives really started to move towards implementation. And so now we have MTSS teams in all of our buildings. We've moved from this design and development approach towards supporting and maintaining and sustaining and fine-tuning. And we have increased use of monitoring tools to monitor all of these practices and their impacts, such as the Panorama Success Platform. One more note. As we moved into the implementation side, we've added more professional learning. And not just in social emotional professional learning, but if you're getting professional learning in our content areas, we use the language from the handbook, the MTSS handbook, and other things as a part of it. So teachers are continually seeing a more coherent picture of these practices as a part of their daily instruction. We wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have clarity about what these practices were. So what are the lasting impacts of all of this work? We've moved into that sustainability approach. We're moving from an initiative team toward an advisory team. Schools have a lot of capacity with common tools to self-monitor and self-grow their practices in these areas. That professional learning is there. And how does it connect to our student data? That's the real big impact for this slide. So two indicators that represent the impact of this work. One is this emotional regulation. And this is how well students rate their own emotions. And if you looked at this data before, you will recognize that they are really hard on themselves. And they're honest and maybe a bit too difficult for their own rating, but they take it seriously. And we see hard-earned growth over time, moving up and up, coming out of recovery through the pandemic. And why? It's because we're teaching students how to regulate as part of our instruction. We also know that when our supportive culture implementation and those practices are shining and going well, we're going to see students attending school more. And so we see our student attendance is increasing significantly. There's lots of ways to measure attendance. This rate is a very high bar. It's the percentage of students with less than 2 absences per month average over time throughout the school year. And that's one of the state measures. Just think about an illness that you have and you need to stay home. Think about an appointment that you can only get during the school day. And you're thinking about a family commitment that you need to adhere to. Any one or a combination of those puts that at risk. So we value that high bar because we know it's important for achievement. And we're seeing significant growth in that, in our attendance rate. And we're not done. We continue to go after increasing attendance through a supportive culture lens as defined through our strategic plan. So that's a quick summary of the supportive culture theme, and I'll invite Director Waddell to take us to the next theme.
Thank you. As we transition to look at consistency and accountability, our work truly begun with the idea of innovation. We must be innovative to meet the needs of each student. So at Everett Public Schools, we defined what innovation means. It's creating and implementing new and improved ideas with the intent of changing practice and to work more efficiently, to address challenges, and to have a positive impact on our students, the staff, and our community as a whole. One administrator stated, innovation is creating a place for students to dream up, design, and execute projects on independent and collective levels. In return, we are seeing a greater sense of community and student engagement in our building. We want to promote and sustain a culture of innovative practices, while also providing consistency and accountability for our system as a whole. We accomplish this by defining essential practices and structures. We develop and implement progress monitoring systems. And we promote, once again, that sustained culture of innovative practices to meet the needs of our students. When looking at evidence of implementation and impact, you see our framework for safety that you learned about previously this month. You also see our common language and consistent comprehensive assessment system, and that idea of defined essential practices and measures to meet the needs of our student priority outcomes. This will drive the development of future synergy and our systems as a whole to help us monitor and watch our growth. As we talk about consistency and accountability, what we're really focusing on is that reliable and transparent system. Consistency means that our policies and practices are applied uniformly. That ensures that everyone knows what to expect. At the same time, we need to embrace innovation because each unique community has different needs. Accountability, on the other hand, means that we hold ourselves responsible to our actions and our outcomes. Now, how does this tie to equitable access? Well, when we have consistent practices and we hold ourselves accountable, then we create a fair and just environment. By having our systems aligned, having those through lines in our professional learning, we can hold ourselves accountable and meet the needs of each student. This means that all students, regardless of their background, have equal opportunities to succeed. Consistency ensures that no one is left behind, and while accountability ensures that we're constantly evaluating and improving our process along the way. In essence, by being consistent and accountable, we build a foundation for equitable access and our students can thrive. It's about making sure that every student has the support and the resources that they need to demonstrate their success and reach their full potential. With this in mind, I'd like to invite Dr. Woods up to guide our conversation as we transition into equitable access.
Thank you. It's actually quite an honor to be able to represent the equitable access theme in our strategic plan. It's exciting, just as we were preparing this, I was just getting all excited about the really clear steps that we have taken over the last 4 years to ensure equitable access. I'm going to talk about 3 specific initiatives, but just to take you back a few years, we have taken these substantial and concrete steps to ensure equitable access to resources to support student learning. For example, every classroom has standard technology equipment that increases student access. And there was a real emphasis on making sure that that was true in every classroom. We have district-wide expectations for instructional time. For example, in elementary schools, we now have consistent instructional schedules that ensure time for math, reading, writing, science, which didn't always exist to that consistency in the past, and social emotional learning that you heard about earlier. And those consistent schedules also allow for just-in-time interventions. When we know that this is when we're doing reading groups, we can push in resources during that time, and we know that that's going to be consistent. So those are some other initiatives that we've taken, but I want you to focus on 3 specific areas of tremendous growth in our district in the area of equitable access. Identifying and removing barriers for diverse learners, particularly focusing on multilingual learners. Early learning and opportunities for access to rigorous courses for all students. The progress of the students receiving multilingual services, evidence of closing gaps, is being accomplished through intentional professional learning, as well as assessment literacy. Our staff needs to understand the students' needs and strengths, and we can get that through understanding their WIDA and other results. They engage in strong Tier 1 instruction using appropriate scaffolds, GLAD at elementary school and SIOP at secondary school, based on the knowledge of what the children in front of them can do and what is their next step. Here you see on the left, a picture, evidence of a graphic that's used by a teacher with her students, and they were making connections with academic vocabulary, science, and reading. It's when do harmless things become harmful. And students were actually putting things up there and doing it. It was a very interactive, and that's an example of GLAD strategy in an elementary school. Early learning programs have greatly increased over the years. We are so proud of this work. Everett Ready, transitional kindergarten, inclusive preschool, and play and learn. So play and learn went from 2 days a week to 5 days a week, included the site at Sequoia High School, where you can see, I don't know, dozens of kids every Friday playing with their caregivers and really engaging. If you have a chance, you gotta go see that. So as well as increased quality of programs and connections with community programs. Here you see some parents and young children at Play and Learn. And that's steadily grown as well. So not only expanded to 5 days a week and more sites, but increasing the numbers of students there. And then ensuring flexible learning programs, learning opportunities, and choice programs. As you know, choice programs include dual language, which is expanding to 4th grade at Emerson Elementary next year, opening at kindergarten at Silver Lake, and we're already planning for expansion into Evergreen Middle School. Flexible opportunities also include our career-connected learning programs through all levels, including summer programs, strong CTE courses, and the STEM signature programs across the district. The progress of students receiving multilingual services has been an intentional focus. On the left, you can see the percent of multilingual students progressing towards exiting services each year over the last 3 years. A higher percentage of multilingual students in Everett were progressing towards exiting services compared to their peers across the state in 2022. That's when we moved to WIDA from the previous test. So you can see that year we were just over 36%, and the state as a whole was just under 31%. Each year, both the state and Everett Public Schools students have shown more progress towards exiting, and Everett students have grown at a faster rate than statewide. The intentional focus on professional learning, implementing leadership and instructional practices designed to support this growth is making a difference for our students. Early learning data is evidence of the increase in early learning programs. You see the data on the middle chart before as well. This is the percent of students at standard on the 6 domains in the Washington Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills. That's a long name, that's why we call it WAKIDS, on each of the domains. Note that in every domain, it's up over time, and all domains are higher now than they were prior to the pandemic. Our students are coming to kindergarten more prepared than they were in 2019, prior to COVID. Our early learning programs and community connections are making a difference. The final chart on this slide shows the increased access to rigorous CTE courses by ML students. This again is the result of intentional work to connect students to rigorous, relevant, and career-connected coursework across the entire system. So what are our next steps in these 3 areas? Inclusionary practices is our next step. And that includes continuing our efforts to ensure growth and progress for each one of our multilingual students. And we're also focused on seeing that same kind of high growth for our students receiving special education services through increasing inclusionary practices both at secondary and elementary levels, ensuring access to grade level standards and curriculum for students who have individualized education plans. And again, we're so proud of the work and success of our early learning programs. And our focus, as you know, now becomes preschool through 3rd grade. We're focusing on kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade instruction to eliminate and prevent gaps. So that WOC Kids provides us great information on students' strengths and needs when they enter kindergarten, but it's no longer going to be a predictor of 3rd grade literacy, because we're going to do those interventions in between and make sure we have really strong kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, so we can ensure 3rd grade literacy by 3rd grade. And in the area of flexible and choice programs, one of our next steps is to continue to grow our signature STEM programs and ensure that access to CTE includes career-connected pathways and that each student has that gap-closing measure for post-secondary success. And I'm going to turn it back over to Director Wada.
Well, we can't really reduce gaps without community engagement, right? So for this work of community engagement, we really focused on expanding our programs and increasing our communication with all of our families. We used innovation to look at alternate ways to provide access to the information to the system as a whole, like our devices that you see off to the side. We expanded our natural leaders, and we increased access to both vision and dental services across the district. We truly want to create authentic partnership and hone in on how we can work together to meet the needs of our students. When looking at evidence of implementation and impact, our Family Engagement Advisory Council, also known as FEAC, has expanded to include 2 members from every school within our organization. That increases representation from across the district. You can see examples of data from our most recent meeting where our families provided input on what are the most important elements when it comes to capital building and capital projects. What is the most important way that they receive information from the district as a whole. We use this information to guide and enhance our work. One Everett Public Schools director stated, the Family Engagement Advisory Council provides invaluable feedback to either further the work of our strategic initiatives or help us rethink aspects of the work. As we look at the lasting impact and next steps, we're going to expand the resources with upcoming school-based health centers at both Cascade and Everett High. We will continue to include our families along the way, like the most recent Let's Connect, as we analyzed and looked at artificial intelligence. And we're going to expand our opportunities for our families as a whole. Later this April, you will learn more about the development and implementation of our culturally responsive customer service practices for our staff to guide all interactions with our students and our families. This holistic approach not only strengthens our community engagement, but it also aligns our broader human capital strategy, where we're ensuring that we support and develop our staff to serve our families. Our strategic plan theme around human capital really focuses on recruitment, development, and retention. As we cultivate that culture of excellence, it includes career pathways and continuous growth for each employee group. We are advancing our recruitment, retention, and career growth. This is all critical for our organization as a whole. We've developed grow your own opportunities, and we've increased partnerships with our colleges to provide more opportunities from our staff within. As you can see here, is one of our learning opportunities with our staff. You learned earlier this month about the evidence of implementation and impact. Here are the key components of our systems and structure. Once again, this connects to our consistency and accountability. Each aspect within our human capital theme has been operationalized, from our Student Intern Academy to our district partnerships and our Grow Your Own program. For lasting impacts and next steps, you see here both quantitative and qualitative data. We will continue to monitor the progress and growth from this lens to drive further actions and our next steps to reach our goals. And if you think about it, as we look at our human capital strategy, we also need to recognize the direct connection to effective instruction. If we take care of our staff, if we develop our staff, then they can provide better learning opportunities for our students. They go hand in hand. By investing in our educators, we give them the resources and the training that they need that lay that foundation for high quality teaching. This holistic approach, once again, enables us to serve the needs of our students. Some of the actions that we've taken in this, it goes back to when we developed our instructional vision. As you heard earlier, our MTSS framework and our comprehensive assessment system. Everything is interconnected. These actions provide consistency and accountability while enabling innovation along the way. Consistent and clear practices at all grade levels, like our equitable assessment and grading practices, provide that clarity across our system. You can see to the picture to the far right, that is a future group that you will learn about later this month. We are expanding our K-12 opportunities for financial literacy. They're meeting along the way to provide guidance. You've seen the other images below that include all of the instructional, some of the instructional practices and professional development that we have along the way. Once again, this theme really focuses on personalized learning, and it centers on student choice, exploration, contribution, and self-assessment. You heard earlier today that structure and system of our common schedule for the middle school to middle school redesign provided a consistent opportunity for social and emotional learning across all middle schools. It also increased the choice. Students had more choice in electives so that they can learn and see what they're interested in to guide their next steps into high school. Our clear progress monitoring through systems development and structures, plus the application of Danielson, the assessment results on our achievement, and our ongoing professional learning, lay the groundwork for what's to come. To the far right, this ties into what you heard from Dr. Woods. It's our professional learning for all district staff on how to leverage metadata. As you're learning language acquisition, students are at different levels of what they can take in and what they can put out, how they can express their knowledge. In this training session, our staff was able to see what they can do to modify and adjust the curriculum to meet the needs of our student. This is just one example of that through line in everything that we do. So now let's look at the impact of our system-wide actions and how they've had an impact on student outcomes. Earlier today, Dr. Meisner shared with you some data elements when it came to strengthening student wellness and engagement. Dr. Woods provided a few data points for reducing gaps in achievement among student groups. And we will now look at ensuring third grade literacy, increasing science achievement, increasing math achievement, and also ensuring that our students are prepared to succeed in college and career. Keep in mind, this is not exhaustive. This isn't new data. You've seen this data before. All right, when we're looking at ensuring students are prepared to succeed in college and career, we're looking at our graduation rate and our increased graduation rate. Keep in mind, the state is in the early 82%, right? So in comparison to where we are to the state, that is a success and it's continuing to rise. The number of students graduating with industry recognized credentials, once again, that's giving them that credential to go into the workforce, is increasing as a whole. When looking at increased math achievement, as you look at this data, you can see our overall performance, the percentage of students meeting standard in grades 5, 8, and 10 on the Smarter Balanced Assessment. To add that element, the dark squares in the middle, that's where the state is at. So you see a continued increase. Also remember that most recent Seattle Times article in terms of our overall performance and where we were, we dropped less and we recovered at a faster rate than other districts across the state. Looking at other data points when it comes to increased math achievement, when we're looking at percentages of students in 5th grade at or above grade level and on the iReady math diagnostic, it's up by 4%. And when we're looking at the typical growth and stretch growth, remember that typical growth is what we expect to achieve in 1 year's worth of growth. And that stretch growth is that sometimes it takes more than 1 year to attain that. Those two are on increase trajectory. When you're looking at that iReady stretch growth, you see 10%. What that means is at that midpoint, halfway through the year, we already have 10% of our students meeting that stretch growth. As a nation, it's 25 to 35%. So halfway through the year, 10% have already met that stretch growth. When looking at increased science achievement, once again, you see upward trends across our data with WACAS at 5th, 8th, and 11th grade. That dark square again is where the state is at. And overall, as a district, we're up by 5.7%. This is what we want to see. This shows that the actions that we're doing, that intentional scheduling of time and focus on science is having an impact on student achievement. Dr. Woods showed you earlier today some of the WACKids data. We are now narrowing our focus on just the elements that directly connect to ensuring 3rd grade literacy. You can see increases across the board, 2.9% for literacy, an increase by 0.4% for language, and an increase by 6.4% in cognitive. This is what we want to see. We want to continue to grow and look at this trajectory with our early learning. Once again, that's the Washington Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills. So why are we telling you all of this? Why did we just look at that data point? At the very beginning, Dr. Bowden talked to you about the fact that this isn't just a checklist. We're looking at, as we try initiatives, we uncover new opportunities to identify next steps. The lasting impact for this is we implemented the early learning. We saw that there was a direct connection, and we know the data supports the early learning to that 3rd grade literacy component. Now, we see we need to hone in our efforts to 1st, 2nd, through 3rd grade. What are we going to do moving forward? We have a P3 committee. We have a P3 certification cohort starting, and much, much more. This is a living, breathing, strategic plan that's guiding future actions. As we move forward, keep that in mind. This isn't just a checklist, that we're looking at what are our strengths, what are our opportunities for growth, and we're taking action. Now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Bowden up to close us out for the evening.
So as we continue to progress monitor with our data, whether it's through the instructional review process, whether it's the presentation of achievement data, winter iReady scores, etc., those are all points in time. Those are inventory of progress to date. But it's also the data that really informs the work of our system through the strategic planning process. And as we're moving into year 5 and we're looking to sunset our current strategic plan, as several of our existing initiatives have already been operationalized. In the next extension of the strategic plan, we'll likely maintain some of the existing themes, but define additional objectives and initiatives to take the work to the next level. But while all these pieces are aligned and working together, they create cohesive and effective strategic plans that drives the organization towards success. Each component plays a crucial role in ensuring that the organization is focused, it's resourceful, it's adaptable, and ultimately is leading to the good work and positive outcomes. So our plan ultimately uses this process, not from being a checklist, but it's not a list of siloed tasks, or even just a list of here's the things that we've done. These initiatives and actions are interconnected. They are developed in coordination and alignment with the work throughout the system. And because of the work that we've engaged in over the last 5 years, it has created the foundational systems of improvement for our students, and we can use this work to extend this into the next 5-year strategic plan. And together, we're going to take that work to the very next level for each student every day. And at this time, I would like to turn it back over to Dr. Salzman, if there's anything additional or the board directors, if there's comments.
Madam Chair.
Okay, are there any questions or comments?
Just excited, the strategic plan is something that I just feel is such a strength in our district. And the alignment that all of the staff, from superintendent down, we see it. And so I love this plan for continuing on. And hopefully we can, I guess if it's gonna end in the end of the 25-26 school year, I'm kind of hoping that fall, we can keep going.
You will see
with
it on
new
the
initiatives,
presentation.
but yeah, it has to.
So I guess I just have one thing, our immediate past board member, I think, asked at a board meeting about, we used to have these initiatives like on the 3 C's and all this kind of stuff. So thinking there will be a time when, because that's just integrated now, the collaboration and all that kind of, that MTSS is just integrated. We don't have to talk about it anymore because it's just who we are and what we do. And I think that is the strength of our strategic plan, is it becomes who we become. It is who we become. And I think we do have time potentially on the draft of the summer retreat for us to talk more about it. And I think that these sessions we've been doing over the past many years with these updates, I think have been really, really helpful so that, we as board members hold the district accountable or the staff accountable. And this really does show the community the work that's being done outside of the business of the district that happens at the board meeting, that this really is the business of the district.
Absolutely. This is how the board progress monitors the work that we do on a regular basis. It's consistent, it's clear, and it's the work that we are doing.
Yeah, and I like that tonight it was sort of a report of closing out. But I do like how you guys have done the sessions where you engage us. How do we understand? How do we see it? How can we communicate it? So really a thank you to how you've structured this the past many years. Just really thank you.
And I could just close by saying this, first of all, to the public, the board allowed us to start with a strategic plan, so kudos to the board. We will be refreshing another 5 years with the same process. What makes it so authentic is these workshops are the strategic plan, you see it in action, but kudos to the board to let us do a strategic plan during the COVID, which I think the public needs to know that, so thank you to the board.
Well, great. Well, I think we're good.
Thank you.
If there's anything further, it's a beautiful evening. And so this concludes the April 1st, 2025 special meeting of the Everett Public Schools Board of Directors.